Good evening and welcome to Alley Theater. We're so glad to have you in our space. My name is Danielle Seiler and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Alley Theater. I just wanted to take a minute to talk to you a little bit about what the Alley does. We were started in 1947 and we have been going strong ever since. We do 10 to 11 plays typically annually. Half are upstairs and some are downstairs. And so this theater, the Hubbard Theater, right now we have Noises Off playing, and it opened a couple of weeks ago, or actually just opened last Wednesday. Time's flying fast. And so this runs until the end of October on the 27th. And what's really interesting about this show is what you're seeing now is the backstage version of the set. And then it turned, for first act, you got the front facing and you see everything that's going on. And then for act 2, it turns around and you get to see the backstage shenanigans that happen. Also, there's shenanigans on the front stage too. It's a hilarious comedy, and I encourage you all to come see it if you just want to laugh until you cannot laugh anymore. It is really lots of fun. Downstairs, we have a show called The Janiad that starts on Friday, and we'll open it officially next week. But it is a tale of Penelope from the Odyssey, who's waiting for her husband to come home. And this is paired with Jane, who lost her husband in 9/11. And so you see Jane really struggling with grief and the long journey of waiting for somebody or something to happen. And so it's got a beautiful tie-in with the poetry that mixes from the classics and Penelope bringing some enlightenment to Jane. So I'd like to encourage you all to go see that too. That one's a real thinker, will pull a little bit heavier on you. So depending on what your preferences are for what day you'd like to come, we have 2 different opportunities for you. There's something else I'd like to let you know about. You might have heard about our all-new play festival that we have, Alley All New Festival. That is coming up at the end of October on the 25th through the 27th. And this year we're going to have 4 readings, and the playwrights here, they're new playwrights, and they are working on their plays and developing them for an audience. And we've invited them to be part of this festival so you can see it here first. We've taken many of these shows that we've developed in our new play festival and put them on stage. Janiad, which is downstairs now, is one of them that we did that with. It was in the new play festival last summer, and so we're putting it on stage this year. So it's always a great opportunity to see what's up and coming and new in contemporary in the play world. So I hope you enjoy our spaces, and please enjoy this evening, and I would like to get Rich up here.
All right, hello everybody. Glad you're here. Thank you, Danielle. That was really nice. We're reinstating an old tradition of telling you what's going on at the Alley. So There you go. We are thrilled for this third installment of the 2024-2025 Imprint Margaret Root Brown reading series to feature Paul Lynch with his powerful Booker Prize-winning novel, Prophet Song, in conversation with our friend Maggie Galehouse. It's wonderful to be back in the alley on the set of Noises Off. It is a fun play. And an honor to present Paul at the start of his U.S. tour. My name is Rich Levy. I'm executive director of Imprint, and since 1980, this series has presented about 400 extraordinary writers from 39 countries, including winners of 13 Nobel Prizes, 73 Pulitzer Prizes, 67 National Book Awards, 19 Booker Prizes as of tonight, as well as 23 U.S. Poets Laureate. We work hard to bring you some of the world's best authors in a series accessible to everyone. Thank you for accompanying us on the journey. Upcoming in 2 weeks, on October 21st, back here at the Alley, we welcome back to Houston Richard Powers, who was last here with Tayari Jones the week the Overstory won the Pulitzer Prize. He comes to us with his new novel, Playground. Richard will converse with Rice professor and award-winning memoirist and essayist Lacey Johnson. General admission tickets for this reading are currently on sale at imprint.org. Season tickets are also on sale, online or via QR code in the lobby. Imprint season subscribers get great perks, including free books, the best seats in the house, free parking, first-in-line book signing, and online access to the series. Something to keep in mind for upcoming events, including Ta-Nehisi Coates, Rachel Kushner, Yuri Herrera, Naomi Shihab Nye, Emma Donahue, Karen Russell, and others. Details at imprint.org. We also invite you to the Imprint Online Book Club, which focuses on new books by authors in this series. On October 27th, it's Danez Smith's Bluff. Our Imprint Escritores en la Casa series features top authors in Spanish. We present award-winning novelist and singer-songwriter Rita Indiana on October 24th. The Imprint Cool Brain series for middle grade children is airborne on November 10th with three-time Newbery Honor Award winner Christina Sundtornvat with her new book, The Squad, free for the first 100 students. We have 3 new writers' workshops starting this month, and we also offer free workshops across Houston that empower senior citizens, K-12 teachers, healthcare providers, and the incarcerated to tell their stories. Info on all this, plus the archive of readings, support for emerging authors, and more is at imprint.org. The Imprint Margaret Root Brown reading series is made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Arts. Imprint also receives invaluable support from the Brown Foundation. This series is named for one of its founders, the Jerry C. Deering Family Foundation, Houston Endowment, the City of Houston through the Houston Arts Alliance, and the Texas Commission on the Arts. Special thanks to WinPark and Grove Atlantic, Paul's U.S. publisher. After Paul reads from and talks about Prophet Song, he'll join in conversation with Maggie Galehouse, an award-winning writer, editor, and researcher, much beloved former book editor at the Houston Chronicle. She has also reported on education, crime, and business for a variety of newspapers. She currently works as a program director in the communications department at MD Anderson Cancer Center. We're delighted Maggie is with us tonight. Yeah. Thank you. Afterwards, Paul will sign books in the lobby. Brazos is here. Get a chance to say hello. Brazos is here tonight offering a 10% discount on signed copies of Prophet Song and online at brazosbookstore.com through Sunday. The discount code is Imprint. Paul Lynch is the author of the award-winning novels Red Sky and Morning, The Black Snow, Grace, and Beyond the Sea. Grace was chosen as a 2018 Carey Group Irish Novel of the Year. The Black Snow won the French Booksellers Prize Prix Libre à Nous for Best Foreign Novel and the inaugural Prix de Lecture Privée. My partner might not be proud of me, I have to say. In 2024, Lynch was appointed Distinguished Writing Fellow at Maynooth University in Ireland and was elected to the prestigious East Dana, which honors Irish writers, artists, and musicians who've made outstanding contributions to their fields. He's with us tonight to read from and talk about Prophet Song, winner of the Booker Prize and the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, in which he tells the story of scientist and mother of four Eilish Stack. As Ireland descends into a totalitarian state, she must locate her husband, whom the secret police have disappeared, and care for her ailing father and young children, all while she finds herself caught in the nightmare logic of a society that is quickly unraveling. Ezi Adujan, chair of the Booker Prize judges, calls Prophet Song a triumph of emotional storytelling, bracing and brave. Readers will find it soul-shattering and true and will not soon forget its warnings. Samantha Harvey calls it a monumental novel with, I love this, prose so flawless and flowing that reading it is akin to being taken up in a wave. You remember why fiction matters. Colin McCann writes, I haven't read a book that has shaken me so intensely in many years. Prophet Song is a testament to a world unraveling. The comparisons are inevitable. Saramago, Orwell, McCarthy, but this novel will stand entirely on its own. Now, Paul arrived in Houston from Dublin last night at, I don't think he got to the hotel till about 1:30 in the morning for his first trip to Texas. Is this your first trip to Texas? Yeah, first trip to Texas. So y'all, now's the time. Please give him a warm, rousing welcome.
Good evening. It's great to be here in Houston. I nearly did Austin there for CC. This is the thing. This is what I had to pull an all-nighter to get here yesterday. So I got into Houston at 1. I got to bed about 1:30, and I took a melatonin and something very strong that normally knocks me out because you need a little box of these things when you're traveling all the time. And I woke up 4 hours later. My body was defiantly on Irish time. So be nice to me tonight. You look like a kind bunch. There may be some strange glitches, mild hallucinatory statements. That's how it is. I'm going to read to you from the opening of Prophet Song, but before I read to you, I'm going to just tell you about where this book came from, because I think the story is very interesting. I'm sure there are some writers in the room. There's probably artists. I think that the journey of writing is always a journey through the dark. You just don't know where you're going. And I had arrived at this sentence like 4 years before Prophet Song. This particular opening sentence, and I thought it was marvelous. I thought this is a great opening sentence, and I was really wedded to it. And I went to New York for a couple of weeks, and I went to a cafe every day, and I stared at a page with this opening sentence. And I kept going with it, and nothing would flow from this marvelous, delicious opening sentence. And because I was thinking it, I was trying to think my way into a book. You can't think your way into art. Art has to begin as a feeling. Art begins as an intuition. And I went off and wrote Beyond the Sea instead, which was a really good idea. But I came back to book 5, needing to write book 5. And I had, this sense of theme, a sense of trying to articulate all these things that are rattling around in the back of my brain. And what you look for as a storyteller is a vessel. You want to have a vessel. that you can launch out to sea that will carry your tale as a story. But the ideas are underneath in the hold. That's what you want. You want it to glide smoothly. And so I was working on this text for 6 months, and it was not a vessel. It was not a story. And I was coming at it this way and that way, and the damn thing just wouldn't give to me what I look for. When what I look for is what you look for, is that sense of just entering into a world and off you go. That feeling you get when you climb into a barrel and somebody rolls you downhill. I like to give the reader that sense of tumbling on ease. So I was writing the wrong book for 6 months, and I knew it was the wrong book because I knew it wasn't giving me the things that I look for. And so it was a Friday afternoon, and I thought, I'm done. I'm done with this. And the reason I'm done with this is because I'm having to think about it too much. And so I stopped writing it, put the file into a folder and, moved it aside and hid it from view. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to think about the problem I've just created, which is I have nothing to write now after 6 months of working. I'm just going to come back on Monday because I had a sense there was something else. And this sense is really important because when you're a writer, when you're an artist, what you're really doing is living with receptivity. You're living alongside this door into the dark. And the door into the dark is your subconscious. It's your intuition. And there's just, the thing about that is you cannot see what's going to come through. You just have to trust that things will come through. And so the ideal is to build your life around that receptivity, to live with that door open, to trust that something's going to come through. And that's what happened. I sat down on the Monday morning and I just created a new document, and I fussy about my font and making it look like a book. I feel like I've achieved something. It kind of looks like a book already. And I waited and I just suddenly wrote the opening page of Prophet Song without any foreknowledge of what was to come. There it was, it arrived. And the thing about this is, when I finished the book, I looked back on that opening page, and the entire meaning of the book is encoded symbolically in the opening sentences. It's all there. And yet I had no idea what kind of book I was writing. And so this is the thing about intuition. We live our lives, we live so much of the waking day, of our 16 hours, operating out of this very narrow bandwidth of consciousness. And I say this as somebody who's been meditating for a very long time. We're trapped in this sort of survival consciousness of, I want this, I need that, and you're just building up all these layers of anxiety and desire and complexity for what you need to get through your day and how you're going to survive. And there's this vast field of consciousness that you're not tapping into it. And this is what you do as an artist. You try to make space for these aspects of mind, because you can't see them. This is the amazing thing of it. But when it arrives intuitively very often, and something powerful emerges. And Ingmar Bergman, the great film director, talked about, a work of art that he said, intuition is the spear you throw into the dark, but intellect is the army you send in afterwards. But first you have to throw the spear. And so the spear comes to you and you throw it. And so this is what happened, that I threw that spear and I wrote the page. And then, of course, you marshal the intellect and you figure out what you're doing and you arrive at a novel. I'm going to do 2 readings tonight, but the second one I'll do later because I'm exhausted. And I said I'm not going to do it all in one go. So I'll come back and do a little short one later, but I'll read to you now from the opening. The night has come, and she has not heard the knocking, standing at the window looking out onto the garden. How the dark gathers without sound the cherry trees. It gathers the last of the leaves, and the leaves do not resist the dark, but accept the dark and whisper. Tired now, the day almost behind her, all that still has to be done before bed, and the children settled in the living room. This feeling of rest for a moment by the glass. watching the darkening garden and the wish to be at one with this darkness, to step outside and lie down with it, to lie with the fallen leaves and let the night pass over, to wake then with the dawn and rise renewed with the morning come. But the knocking. She hears it pass into thought, this sharp, insistent rapping. Each knock possessed so fully of the knocker, she begins to frown. Then Bailey, too, is knocking on the glass door to the kitchen. He calls out to her, "Ma'am," pointing to the hallway without lifting his eyes from the screen. Ailish finds her body moving towards the hall with the baby in her arms. She opens the front door and 2 men are standing before the porch glass, almost faceless in the dark. She turns on the porch light, and the men are known in an instant from how they are stood. The night cold air suspiring, it seems, as she slides open the patio door. The suburban quiet. The rain falling almost unspoken onto St. Lawrence Street, upon the black car parked in front of the house. How the men seem to carry the feeling of the night. She watches them from within her own protective feeling. The young man on the left is asking if her husband is home, and there is something in the way he looks at her, the remote yet scrutinizing eyes that make it seem as though he is trying to seize hold of something within her. In a blink, she has sought up and down the street, seeing a lone walker with a dog under an umbrella, the willows nodding to the rain, the strobings of a large TV screen in the Zajic's house across the street. She checks herself then, almost laughing, this universal reflex of guilt when the police called your door. Ben begins to squirm in her arms, and the older plainclothesman to her right is watching the child. His face seems to soften, and so she addresses herself to him. She knows he too is a father. Such things are always known. That other fellow is much too young, too neat and hard-boned. She begins to speak, aware of a sudden falter in her voice. "He'll be home soon, in an hour or so. Would you like me to give him a ring?" "No, that will not be necessary, Mrs. Stack. When he comes home, could you tell him to call us at his earliest convenience? This is my card." "Please, call me Ailish. Is there something I can help you with?" "No, I'm afraid not, Mrs. Stack. This is a matter for your husband." The older plainclothesman is smiling fully at the child, and she watches for a moment the wrinkles about the mouth. It is a face put out by solemnity, the wrong face for the job. "It is nothing to worry about, Mrs. Stack." "Why should I be worried, Carda?" "Yes, indeed, Mrs. Stack. We don't want to be taking up any more of your time. And aren't we damp enough this evening making calls? It'll be hard work getting ourselves dry by the heater in the car." She slides the patio door closed, holding the card in her hand, watching the 2 men return to the car, watching the car move up the street. It brakes for the junction, and its tail lights intensify, taking the look of 2 eyes agleam. She looks once more onto the street, returned to an evening's quiet, the heat from the hall as she steps inside and shuts the front door. And then she stands a moment examining the card and finds she has been holding her breath. This feeling now that something has come into the house. She wants to put the baby down. She wants to stand and think, seeing how it stood with the 2 men and came into the hallway of its own accord, something formless yet felt. She can sense it skulking alongside her as she steps through the living room past the children. Molly is holding the remote control over Bailey's head, his hands flapping in the air. He turns towards her with a pleading look. "Ma'am, tell her to put my show back on." Ailish closes the kitchen door and places the child in the rocker, begins to clear from the table her laptop and diary, but stops and closes her eyes. This feeling that came into the house has followed. She looks to her phone and picks it up, her hand hesitating. She sends Larry a message, finds herself again by the window watching outside. The darkening garden not to be wished upon now, for something of that darkness has come in to the house. Thank you.
Thanks for that beautiful reading. Nice to hear your accent. We don't have accents in Texas. We import them. You talk about feeling. In your opening remarks, you talked about, art starts with a feeling and the feeling that came inside the house, right? And if you've read the book, we're not going to tell you any spoilers tonight, but the reading of this book is physical, okay? For those of you who've read it, like me, you will know that it's like an ache. I mean, you narrate this dread. This is a family that's a regular family, like families that are in this room, and their lives change slowly and slowly and slowly. And what is normal in a suburban life becomes not normal at all. And I want to talk about how you narrate. This is kind of a craft question, but how do you narrate that kind of feeling, this sort of slow drumbeat? It's like in your stomach when you're reading the book. Trust me. If you haven't read it yet.
It's tricky to, I was talking about the intellect is the army you send in afterwards. So this is sort of perhaps a mixture of the intellect and the intuition, because obviously there's the song that arrives. So what you heard me read there is something that emerges pre-planned. And, when I start writing a novel, I'm looking for something very specific. I'm not just looking for something that gives me the feeling of a question that I want to start exploring.
Okay.
But there has to be something built into the language that's not rational. But it's part of the process. I know what I'm doing, but it's kind of like an ineffable substance. It's built into the language. It's part of the song. It's the sound. It's the sense of incantation.
Yeah.
Right? That
Incantatory. I looked up that word, actually.
And
yes.
So I'm looking for that feeling of the Greeks called it the daemonic. That the Greeks didn't believe that you yourself were creative. They thought you were in communication with the gods. So your daemon was the channel. The daemon would connect you with the gods. And so there's a certain quality in writing that I always like that's daemonic. The writer is channeling something. And the question is the channeling, are they channeling something out there or inside? It's inside, but in relation to out there. And so all of this goes into the language for a start. So there's the sound, there's the deep voice. But then there are the choices you make. And so, for example, this book is written in close third.
Yes.
So we're up there alongside Ailish. And I write in a certain kind of way, particularly since Grace onwards, my third novel, Grace. I started writing in the present tense. And I made a decision about that because I realized that one of the things that I'm looking to capture in my fiction is to get the reader into that space of unknowing. Because we live our lives in the present tense. We live at that edge. We never can ever know what's next. And that's, if you think about that, that's the starting point of philosophical blindness. It's the starting point of the great unknowing that we actually live within. And we all move through life. We move through a labyrinth. We're like Ailish. We live with just a bit of matchlight in the dark. It's all we have. The present tense gets me there in a way that's important to my preoccupations. As a writer, I sort of realize that I'm done, or at least temporarily done with, the classic past tense way of writing fiction, which was, it's been the dominant mode. It's still, to a certain degree, maybe is. But there's something about the present tense that gets you into the unfolding unease, the heartbeat of the moment.
Yes, it's like you were talking about rolling down a barrel in a hill. It's the same thing. It's propulsive. So you're on that journey.
And this is something I learned in my third book, Grace Again, which is that to pay attention to what the character does not know, to be right up there in that space of unknowing, then the reader starts to feel it too. And it's really important. And then, of course, you move beyond that, because this is a book where there is a grand sense of alienation in the book. It begins in a known world, begins in a world where, this is okay, maybe the book is set in the future, or maybe it's in a counterfactual present. The book doesn't state, but it's a world I recognize. It's Dublin that I recognize.
Yes. And it's a world that anyone in this audience would recognize too. It's not an unknown world.
But there is a breach. It's occurred in such a way that nobody's been paying attention to it, and so the unknown is starting to take over
penetrate.
from the known.
Insidious, yeah.
And so that's where the feeling of alienation starts to creep in. That sense of not being able to read the signs, not being able to fully understand what's going on, not being able to see the clockwork of the fates.
Right.
And this is really important to the book too, about why the book is set in the kitchen, in the house, in the domestic space, because all of us live our lives, dealing with the domestic. This is, and we go to work and we shipping kids here and there, and if you've got kids, and or whatever it is you're doing, Eilish is dealing with her father. She's constantly in this space of just that narrow bandwidth that I was talking about.
Right. She's a mother of 4 who's just trying to keep it all together, which she would be doing on a normal day if the country she was living in wasn't in a police state.
Yeah. And so the ability for her to be at the center of political action is nonsense. That's never good. That would be meaningless. And so the center of action is the ordinary life. But it's very hard to truly understand what's unfolding around you, to have to truly, even now when you ask somebody, the complexity of now that we're in, like all the moving parts, the layers that are truly, it's very hard to define it. It's very hard to hold it all together. And then historians look back and they say, this is what was happening and this is what was happening, and it's only part of the puzzle. It's very difficult at any point of us for us to truly articulate reality. Reality is so complex. It's so far beyond all of us. And so that's the alienation that you start to get in this novel. And so the reader feels that alienation.
And the close third person I think you're talking about is you're reading along and you're with Eilish. As a reader, you're with her, you're watching her. She has teenagers. And just because the world is crumbling around him doesn't mean her teenagers aren't being teenagers. Your life keeps happening. It's one thing to watch on the news, what happened in Syria or somewhere else. And it's another thing to be inside it. It's not that your life is separated. You're living your regular life, trying to get your kids to school, and all of a sudden the utilities don't work and the news stops on television, and it's propaganda, but you're still in your regular life.
See, what we're talking about here is the sort of the creep of unraveling.
Right.
That you don't
see dread.
But you don't notice it until you don't notice it until it's too late. This is the thing that the tipping point that occurs in this book actually happens before the book even starts. Nobody noticed. People kind of sleepwalked their way into it. And, so denial is a huge part of what this book is exploring. Because Eilish is like everybody else who has come of age in a liberal democracy, has grown up in such a world, believes that the past is that which shall continue to be. It's a very dangerous thought. And
assumes certain things about what living in the world is and doesn't question them.
Yeah.
Until
it's staring you in the face, until the state reaches in and grabs hold of your husband and gobbles him up and disappears him. And yet still there's the denial. The denial is, this won't be allowed to happen. Common sense will prevail. We all know. Right? And it's one of the great fallacies that we all have. We just assume that common sense is going to prevail, and so this is what Eilish is dealing with. And meanwhile, Bailey's giving out because there's just never enough milk in the fridge because he's just drinking milk all the time.
Meanwhile, the kids are like, "Why did you forget the chocolate?" And can I go to hockey practice? And the oldest son, Mark, has a girlfriend, and so doesn't come home on time, and it's all of that crap on top of everything
and
else.
she has a newborn, and
Yes.
and so she's dealing with kind of what in a certain kind of way you might call peak complexity. You get to that point in midlife where you have ailing parents. Simon, her father, is a scientist, and he's now sliding into dementia.
And she's a scientist too. It's worth noting.
Yeah. And she's holding down a career as a senior executive at a pharmaceutical company. And suddenly her husband is gone, and she's got, but the three teenagers are all dealing with things in different ways. And she's like, this is also what interests me is just that level of complexity of what a person is in the modern world, and within this, existential setting, because the novel is distinctly, as far as I consider it, existential rather than political. And
There's not a lot of politics considering they're in a police state.
Yeah.
That's vague on purpose, I'm assuming.
well, you see, this is part of the design, and
Right.
it's about the idea again of that we do not live at the center of political action. And the way I think about this, and I was thinking about this when I was writing the novel, and it goes back to the Iliad. When you look at how that book is written, it foregrounds the heroics, it foregrounds the politics. But burning Troy, what of it? What about the actual ordinary lives? And so Prophet Song turns that inside out and takes you away from the center of political action, away from the heroics, down to the ordinary, the heartbeat of the center of the ordinary. And that was really important, because at that point then you start to create mythical space. Because what this book is going after is not some statement about a regime. If I had focused on that, then the politics of the book would be about the regime.
We'd be talking about
and everyone would just be like, they
Right.
would only be talking about that. That's what the book is about.
Right.
And of course, the book would not have done what it's done, because it would have been a shite book. That's just the reality of it.
That's Irish for shit. Yeah.
But where was I? See, I told
Shite
you.
book, that's where you were.
Christ.
If you had written overtly about politics and set this in, it is set in a real place,
Yeah, so
but it's not a real
Yeah,
political, right,
It's about the mythic space that
Right.
you're opening up.
right.
And so obviously the book is located in the real, and it's located intensely in a very, there are very long sentences in this book, and they're absolutely tapping into a sense of a distinct sense of reality. But there's the mythic starts to creep into the book, and this, what later reveals itself is the sense of what this book is really about. It's a wail of grief. It's a wail of grief for what we are now, what we will be, and what we have been, what we are always. It's a wail of grief for a kind of wretchedness, I think, that's really built into the human condition. This is what we do. No matter how great we aspire to be, no matter how lofty the goals of civilization that we sometimes aspire to, sometimes hold for decades of time, we drop the ball. It's like,
And we keep doing it
We
over
keep
and
doing
over
it, and
again.
it's happening now again. And it's like this is what happens. This is what we are, and that's a very pessimistic conclusion. But that's how I see it. And if this book, so much of political writing is writing towards a solution, is writing towards an answer. The writer knows the answer to the problems that they're setting out. And so that's grievance, but grief cannot be solved. Grief is that which lies beyond our ken. It lies beyond our understanding. Grief is the human condition. It's what is lost is lost. It cannot come back. And so reaching into that darkness, reaching into the unknown is really important for my writing. It always has been. And so that's why I see all my books really as metaphysical novels. Mm-hmm. And why Prophet Song is a metaphysical book rather than a political book. But of course, it does contain a political dimension.
That's right. But before you get off on another topic, I want to talk about, I'm reeling you in. I want to talk about the title, because that's kind of what we're talking about. At the beginning of the book, you have a few quotes, and one is Ecclesiastes, there is no new thing under the sun, right? And toward the end of the novel, when you talk about what the prophets say and what they might sing, it says that they sing the same song over and over again. The end of the world happens over and over again, that it's vanity for people to think it's the end of the world. It's a lot of people are having the end of their world today, or they will have it next week, or they've had it before. So
this is something that happens after Ailish has been through the circles of hell. At this point, she's in the ninth circle.
yes.
And she's watched the world that she's known unravel completely. And, she's she stared into the abyss, as this novel makes you do too. I mean, I think that it's like fiction can and should be a mirror with which we can stare at the Medusa without ourselves turning to stone. And she has this moment later where, as you say, she suddenly realizes that this idea of cataclysm that you grow up hearing about, that it's just a myth, it's just a story, and that the end of the world is actually always occurring. It's the end of the world is occurring again and again and again, but it's always a local event.
It's your house.
It comes to your city, your town. It knocks on your door. It's the end of the world for you, your family, your people, your community. For the rest of us, we watch it on the news. It's something that passes into the history books. It passes into myth. It becomes Troy. And so that's the sort of the mythic dimension of this book.
I do think that point is really driven home, and that is why it's so poignant, is because, as you said, it's sort of the story inside out. And this is weird, but there's an American play called Our Town, which I love, and maybe that's out of fashion to love a play like Our Town. But it really is about how beautiful ordinary things are, and how painful it is to think about what you assumed in your life, that your husband would come home after leaving, and that your children will always be safe. When that goes away, you think, wow, that ordinary Tuesday sounds pretty good right about now. Yeah. And I think that's what's really so haunting about the book and why it's so powerful.
Yeah. And there's always that kind of suspension of grief, because she kind of believes that everything is going to be restored.
Okay, but let's talk about that, because she has to believe that. She's a parent. I mean, there is a point, I will say, I read the book twice. After I found out I was going to talk to you, I thought, oh God, I better read it again. I mean, got to remember all the names of these kids and everything. 4 kids. But I do think that that's, anyway, I lost my train of thought, sorry. Anyway, we're both doing it. Yeah, exactly. I guess I was just going to say that I think for Eilish, I know what I was going to say, that there was a click for me. The first time I read the book, I was with her the whole way. And I was still with her the second time, but the people are talking to her and they're saying, you should leave. Things are really bad. And her father, who was one of my favorite characters, Simon, who has dementia, who says the smartest things in the book, which is just another layer of the way things can't, you're not sure about what you can count on anymore, right? Even to your family member. He's saying, you think that you're experiencing something, you think it's like in a book or on television, but it isn't. It's happening right here, right now.
Yeah, Simon has these moments of real lucidity, and he sees what is truly happening. And there's a point where he says to her, do you understand reality? You understand? And she says, oh, don't be giving that nonsense. And he's like, no, like you took the degree. Reality is tradition is what we can agree on. It's all it is. It's all we can agree on. And that when you take control of the institutions, you start to take control of the facts. And then you can start changing the facts. And at which point...
We wouldn't know anything about that, would we?
And if you say one thing is another thing, and you say it enough times, then people take it to be true. And he says that's what they're doing. They're muddying reality. They're muddying our understanding of the objective reality that we've created, particularly in the last couple of 100 years. But he also warns that, you can borrow for a time against reality, but
it's coming for you.
Reality will level the scales again at some point, which is true generally. I think it's a metaphysical law. It's just true. Don't ask me to explain it. I'm too tired.
Not on jet lag. We won't ask you to do that.
But so he's telling her to leave. He says...
And he's not the only person who tells her to leave.
Yeah, we're going to go to visit Anya, her sister, in Toronto. We're going to go and visit at Easter. And he's like, you should consider staying there. The kids will pick up the accents quickly enough. And she says, that's all very,
Molly's got hockey.
Molly's got hockey.
To do.
What if you fall and break a hip? Who's going to look after you? And Anya's on the phone from Toronto later on. And she's really watching it. The Unraveling, and she says to her, history is a silent record of those who did not know when to leave.
I know. Yes, I have that. That's in my notes that I'm not looking at.
And again, Eilish fights, resists, because you have to hope. Hope is, this is what we
It's
do.
everything.
This is what we do so well as human
Yes.
beings, you know. And she keeps hoping because, well, she wants to get her husband back. She wants the world of law and order and human rights to be restored for her children, because this is the world that they should live in. And to live in anything else is the idea of terror.
Yes.
And so she just believes blindly in that everything will be restored, while making these extraordinary decisions at the same time. You know, to me, she's a Greek heroine in some respect. This is how I conceived of her when I was writing it, you know, and the Greeks have this concept called ate. I think that's how you pronounce it. It could be, we were talking about words you mispronounced earlier when you just read them and you never hear anybody talking about them, but I think that's how.
Epitome, that was mine, not epitome, epitome for like 4 years. I said epitome.
But this idea that you make decisions in certainty, but what you reap is the unforeseen. This is how life, I was talking about the match in the dark. This is how we live life. We move through darkness we do not know. And she's making these decisions. She's trying to save Mark. She's trying to get him out of conscription, to get him out of the country. And she cannot see the ramifications. She cannot outwit the fates, so to speak. She cannot sense how great the mechanism is. This thing, this unraveling, it has its own energy. It has its own chaotic laws, and she
Yes.
cannot read them. And so she's constantly moving nobly through this space, and she's very noble. She's really making, you know, she is holding so much. She's holding the family. She's holding everything for everybody, and holding herself too, while being in despair. And I mean, there's one point later where a wife of another trade unionist who has been taken away.
Her husband was a trade unionist, which is one of the reasons he's
Yeah,
disappeared.
and so the head of the trade union, she quietly steps away because, but you know, there's a lot of trade union members are arrested, and because there was the teachers union of Ireland, a very powerful union, and they want to march in the state, who are beginning to move from a populist government into a tyrannical government. They don't want them to do, and this is the start of the unraveling, and so Larry is arrested, and then he's, you know, he is silenced, he's taken away, and the judiciary have no power, and so on and so forth. And Eilish is talking to one of the wives, and the wife says to him, like, even the dogs in the street know what's happened to them. We know they're gone. And Eilish just
She won't go there.
will not go there. The hope that she has that everything will be restored is so great. And she stands up and walks away from the conversation because she has to believe. Because if you don't believe, what have you?
Yeah, nothing.
And there's a moment where she sees, like, she realizes that she had lied to Bailey, her 12-year-old. She told the other kids the dad had been taken away, but she lies to Bailey. And then she has to tell him the truth. And she realizes she can't lie to a child. Telling a lie to a child is a really dangerous thing.
It's also worth saying, I think, that, you know, her youngest is a baby, but the other three are basically teenagers, and what's happening around them affects them very differently. And, you know, that's the other thing she's dealing with as a mother. I mean, her oldest child is radicalized.
Yeah,
Basically.
it's an inevitability. You know,
Right.
if you watch, you know, the state reach into your house and take your father away. If you watch the world of law and order and humanitarian values being completely dismantled in front of you, and then you watch your city divided in half, and you watch your city being bombarded. You know, you're radicalizing a generation of people. This is what happens. Like, it's very obvious that that's what happens, and this is what happens to Mark. But Molly responds in a very different way. She starts to turn inward, and she starts to withdraw. This outgoing, sporty, hockey-playing kid becomes depressed and really deeply, dangerously withdrawn. And so the book is actually also kind of mapping trauma and how trauma
Yes.
affects people
Yes.
differently. And Bailey then, because he's been lied to, he then has this very destabilized relationship with his mother, and that leads to certain things. And there's a moment in the book when, during kind of peak unraveling, when there are airstrikes, like they're living under, they're on.
There's
She's
a
on
bombardment.
There's a
Yes.
bombardment, and she's under the stairs, cowering, petrified, because there's nowhere to go, and she's got the child in her arms, this infant in her arms, and she realizes that this child is just absorbing her terror. It's just absorbing her anxiety, because a child, an infant, is completely regulated by the mother. A child's cortisol is the same as a mother's cortisol. And so she's transmitting her terror, her anxiety into this child. This is the transmission of trauma. This is intergenerational trauma. The child who will have no idea if the child grows up and survives, will have no idea why the child is behaving this way when he's an adult, and so like the ramifications of what this family goes through will continue through time, and it's
sort of in the child's DNA. That's
Yeah.
kind of where it is. Do you want to read again?
yeah.
Is
Sure,
it time for that?
Maybe it is.
All right. I have other questions to ask you, not about the text. It's time to read.
Too late. This is later on in the unraveling, when the city is divided, and there are security forces outside the house, like on the street, and they've built a little I don't know. See, there's my brain not working. What do you call it when they build a little thing with sandbags and maybe a checkpoint? Bunker. It's, yeah, blockade, checkpoint, blockade kind of thing. Anyways, in the afternoon, she sits by the window waiting for a detailed report on the BBC while Ben naps in the cot. The news comes on and she turns it off, shaking with rage, thinking, this is not the news. This is not the news at all. The news is a civilian watching the soldier outside her home as he lolls on a sandbag playing with his phone. The news is the assault rifle resting against the sandbag. It is the soldier's laughing mouth. It is the fast food wrappers and coffee cups strewn about the asphalt. It is the retired couple from up the street who have decided that they want to go. The news is their quarrel in the driveway. It is the woman flapping her hands about what cannot be taken in the car. It is the husband who shuts his face to his wife. It is the black bag the woman holds in her arms like a child. It is what is inside the bag. The news is the entire contents of the car. It is the boot the man has to sit closed. The news is the driveway gated for the last time, the house dark at night. It is the traffic light stuck on red for a week before it goes dark. It is the car that will not be allowed through the checkpoint. The news is the shrinking air on the streets. It is the shuttered shops, the windows plyboarded. It is the hoarse dogs woofing throughout the night. It is the eldest son who does not call anymore because it is too risky to call, and nobody knows if he is dead or alive. She watches an army officer riding down the street on a nodding black horse, the build of the thing. She thinks it is a Frisian sport horse, the rider's hands quiet on his lap, his dark boots gleaming to the knee. How he moves within some serene and regal bearing, as though he were but an emissary of the law of force. The soldiers at the checkpoint come to standing, and the officer does not dismount, but waves his crop as though casting incantations into the air. She watches the horse rotate an ear without turning its head. It is listening, it seems, to something beyond the uneasy stillness, the whisperings of a tall conifer, the radiation from the sun upon its leaves. It can hear the death that awaits with open arms all over the city, the death that waits to be let drop from the sky.
So why did you pick that to read? What do
It's
you want
short, and
Because you're tired.
I'm tired. Oh my God. Am I doing all right?
You're doing fine. I'm going to ask you a different question.
Yeah.
That was beautiful, and we're going to come back to the texts. Congratulations on the Booker, by the way.
Yeah.
2003. It's a really big deal, and I want you to tell us how your life changes when you get that phone call, because I think it's dramatic. And
Well, it's not a phone call. You're in the room.
okay,
and nobody knows.
So put us there, because it is life changing
It's
for a writer.
extraordinary, yeah.
And it's going to be for the rest of your career.
Yeah, like the Booker is like, it's probably the biggest prize in the English language. Certainly on the other side of the Atlantic, it's
It's big here too.
Yeah, it's it. I mean, it's truly life changing. I mean, every writer dreams of winning it, and those who deny, who say they don't, are just lying. That's the truth of it.
right.
Because you just know it's going to change your life in terms of like it's going to make your life easier. It's going to make publishing books easier, because publishing books is a really hard thing to do. It's extremely difficult now. I've had my troubles along the way. My third book, Grace, you know, I had a publisher in the US, I had a publisher in France as my primary publishers, but I couldn't get a publisher in the UK, Ireland for that book for 14 months. And I was...
It's set during the time of the potato famine, right? It's the 1840s
Yeah,
or
yeah,
50s.
yeah, yeah, it's-
So
yeah.
you'd think that you would be able to get an Irish publisher. It's about...
Yeah, and I knew I'd written a really strong book,
Yes.
and but I waited for 14 months, and that's typical for if you're not playing the commercial game, if you're writing as a serious fiction writer and you're writing the books that need to be written without any compromise for you know what the market is, then it's just going to be hard for you. And so these are the reasons why you dream of it. But what you don't dream of is the other side of it, the sacrifices that are required, the all-night flights, that kind of thing. And you know, it's marvelous and it's surreal, and an example of just how strange it can get. So I was in Sydney, and I had just come from Melbourne, and I realized I had to do a photo shoot.
A
A photo shoot. They wanted me to do a photo shoot and then an interview with the Sydney Morning Herald. And I was like, okay. So I had washed my hair, and then I realized the stuff I used to tame the frizz, I'd left it in Melbourne. So I needed
You
my
needed
stuff.
product.
Yeah, I
Yes.
needed product. I thought, oh God, how am I going to get to I have 20 minutes to do this. So I just got into Sydney. I didn't know where I was. So I was leaving the hotel to try and find a pharmacy or somewhere that would sell it. And this lady coming through the door says, Paul, she says, I'm here to interview you in half an hour. And I said, okay. I said, I'm just going to get some product, hair products. And she said, I'll come with you. I know where there's a pharmacy. So we went to the pharmacy. We had a great chat. And I said to her, but you can't write about this, And
And that's all she wants to write
You
about,
know,
for sure.
and the next day, the Irish writer, a very good friend of mine, Donald Ryan, sends me a text message with a screen grab. And he said, what the fuck's going on down there? And the screen grab was a headline in the Sydney Morning Herald that said, the day I went shopping for hair products with the Booker Prize winner. So this is part of the
This is your
strangeness.
life now.
I'm a
You're a
serious man.
celebrity.
I'm a serious man. How do I explain this to people? You can't. But it's also kind of part of the beauty of it. But I remember on the night, because you don't know in advance.
So you're in a room.
You're in a room in
And
London.
you're with
It's a
how-
big dinner. It's a very big deal.
So
And
there's
black-
like 6 people on the short list.
Yeah.
So there's 6 writers
Yeah.
who are hopeful.
The pressure in
that
the room is it's metamorphic. It's extraordinary, and because one person is going to get it, and 5 other people are going to be really bitter, and but I actually walked out of the ceremony about 20 minutes beforehand, because I'd had a really bad year and a half before that. Just my personal life everything had really fallen apart, and I'd been sick, and all sorts of stuff had happened. And I just kind of thought, God, if I do win this, I won't be able to contain it on the stage. I won't be able to deal with it. It's too much for what I've had to come through. And I left the room, and I didn't realize that I was causing panic, because all the producers and they were
'Cause
like,
they knew
where's
that
he
you-
gone?
He's the one we have to keep in the room.
And,
right.
and Ben Ockery, the British novelist, saw me and came after me and said, "What's going on?" And we had words. And then my publicist appeared and she's like, "You have to get back in there." And I took a walk around and I went in and I got it back together again. But it's a very beautiful thing. It's an honor because you realize that when you're a writer, it's a solitary calling. You follow an act of faith. You go into a room and you have a lonely impulse to write a novel that no one's asked you to do. Nobody, in truth, is really waiting on it, but you do it anyway.
Right.
You write it for 4 years, and then something happens like that, and it touches like the culture. Like in Ireland, it was a huge deal. It's on the front page of the Irish Times as a photograph, and like I went in to collect I have two kids, and I went to collect my 2 kids when I got back to Ireland. And it was an absolutely filthy, dark, wet night, and a true definition of just back into reality. And I went to collect my kids from after school, and they're in the same classroom. And there was this an 8-year-old boy. He's looking at me, and he puts his hand to his chest, and he starts singing Ireland's Call, which is a rugby song, but it's like a national anthem. And he starts singing it, and he's looking at me, and I'm thinking, he's not singing that at me, is he?
That's weird.
And I kind of looked again, and then there was 10 of them, and they were standing singing this song. It was like Dead Poets Society. And I just come through the most surreal week of my life, and I couldn't process it. And I walked out, and I said to my daughter, "Were they singing that song at me?" And she says, "No, sometimes they sing that song." I was like, "Okay." Right? And then an hour later, I get a text message from a dad who's a friend of mine, and he said, "I'm hearing a tall story that the kids all stood up and sang Ireland's Call for you." And this is
That's beautiful, actually. That's really great.
But it's sort of something beautiful about that, you write this book that no one asked you to do, and suddenly children are connected to it. It's gone into the culture that in Ireland is, Irish people own their writers. They really own them. They celebrate them. It's a really big deal, and so you sort of, to be the center of that was really touching. It kind of, John McGahern used to say that a writer has no responsibility to anybody or anything other than their sentences. When he was asked about, "Do you consider yourself an Irish writer?" And that was his response. And I used to hold to that very, very, very distinctly. But I realize now that I am an Irish writer. It's inescapable, that when you come through something like this.
What does it mean to be an Irish writer? What does it mean to you? How would you describe the tradition you're writing in?
The tradition I write in is not a tradition that is Irish, really. I think that there are Irish elements to my writing. Joyce was in there from the start. Beckett too. They're just inescapable. But the tradition that I write in is actually what I call cosmic realism. I wrote an essay about this last year because I wanted to describe something that I felt has not been properly articulated, which is a style of fiction writing that is going after something whereby they're trying to articulate the human condition in its complexity, as though from a cosmic eye looking down at what we are always, and trying to find images that connect this sense of the infinite with the present. And so there are writers that have always done this. Melville is one of the great writers. Dostoevsky has an extraordinary way of doing this. Conrad is an extraordinary writer. It's in Woolf, it's in many writers, but writers like Conrad in particular have an extraordinary ability to connect this sense of the human condition, this cosmic sort of condition that we find ourselves in, and present images for it. And this is how I consider the writing that I fit into. And there's an extraordinary moment in Conrad's Typhoon where the boatswain has to go down into the ship in the hull, and they're in the midst of a shipwrecking storm. Is a typhoon, and the boat has been pitched, to an extreme degree. They're on complete darkness on the ocean, and he goes down through the coal bunker and then into the hold. And in the hold are all these Chinese workers who've been working for 10 years, and they've got their chests full of all the money they've saved up And in the storm, the chests are being smashed off each other. So all their money is just completely strewn. And they're tearing each other apart over their money to try and get their money in the darkness on this ship, on this abyssal ocean. And if that's not the human condition, I don't know what is. And that's the beauty.
Okay, I just have to tell you all that at dinner you said, I bet I'm a lot different than you think I am, because these books are intense and, and you're pretty jolly, you're fun.
I'm just, yeah.
But anyway, back to the human condition.
Yeah.
You're tired, I know. Back to the human condition.
But you see, the thing is we are many selves, and this idea of having to present myself as like the writer on the page. Like the writer on the page is who I am when I write.
Yes.
And that's an expression of a sensibility and a way that I think about the world and a way that I need to write. But who I am in the world socially is very different. I mean, I'm a quiet person, generally speaking, and you kind of learn how to go up on a stage and make a fool of yourself. But they don't necessarily have to be the same thing, if you know what I mean.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things about the human condition, I mean, we're not going to talk about all your books, but let's just say, for people who might not know, you've written 5 books, and the first one I think was published, was it in 2013?
2013, but I was
So-
writing for,
A while, but
Yeah.
it's still, you've published 5 books in 10 years.
I know that's crazy.
It's crazy.
But I'm not prolific.
Well, I mean, you're sort of prolific. Some people don't write any
well,
books.
it's kind
so
of 3 or 4 years per book, mostly speaking.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just, like I had The Black Snow finished when Red Sky Morning was published.
I see. So
So-
you were working on getting
Yeah.
it published while you were writing another book.
and then like as soon as Red Sky was published, I was working on Grace.
Right.
Um,
But I want to I want to get back to the human condition, because one of the things that is across all of your books is the characters are in extreme distress, mentally, morally, and physically. And I think the physical aspect, you talked about the book Grace. This is set during the Irish potato famine, and basically Grace is pushed out of her house and she's sent walking. Her mother cuts her hair. She's 14 years old. She's like, you're going to live as a boy. I can't feed everybody. Good luck to you. Try to make some money and come back. And I mean, is that a fair assessment of what happens?
yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'd say that these are ordeal narratives.
They're ordeal, but also there's something about writing about what happens to your mind. I'm talking about the interconnectedness, that when you don't eat, something happens to your brain.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what you narrate. And I think that just being in that place in all of the books is this kind of extreme. So you can really look at this, I don't know, chaos or conversation. This isn't a question. I'm just talking.
Yeah,
I'm
no, I
sorry.
agree with you though. Like Dostoevsky once said, "How much human being is in a human being?" I love this. This is my bread and butter. This is what I'm about. And when I talk about my novels being metaphysical, like there are problems of being that I'm interested in, problems of
Yes.
knowledge that I'm interested in. How do we know the world? How do we know ourselves? How do we make sense of this world that we're in? How do we, how do we arrive at some sense of dignity when the world wants it to be otherwise? Because as I see it, all of us live in this moment, this white hot moment of life, and we all want to have some dignity. We want to have some sense of security. We want love. We just want these basic elemental things. And we also most especially want meaning. We want to have meaning. Why are we here? Why am I, living my life? Why am I making my decisions the way I'm making them? But we live in a world around us that's silent. Whatever meaning we arrive at, we must arrive at it by ourselves. There's no other way to do it. And so this is the sort of the conditions of the worlds that I create. There's this silent, implacable, hostile world around my characters. And often they're shunted into something where, maybe they'll meet a tragic end, but they will do their damnedest to avoid it. Something will be met in that journey, something within themselves. There's a kind of a Jungian aspect to my writing, actually. That sense of of overcoming a sense, an archetypal journey that seems to be, it's just, I don't think about it, it's just something I'm deeply interested in. How do we overcome? I'm interested in that question. How do we overcome? How do we define ourselves in our overcoming? And who are we when we, with grace? That book arrives at a place of secular grace, a very sort of beautiful place. But to get there, she's gone through hell.
Yeah.
And she's gone through hell in such a way that she's lost the power of speech. And that book in particular, because I've mentioned it a few times tonight, I may as well just say a few things about it. The Irish famine, the Great Irish Famine, is our great national trauma. And it's an extraordinary event that it has a genuine, it has left a genuinely traumatic legacy that's passed down through the generations. And what's passed down through the generations is silence. And it's an extraordinary way that it manifests. People never talked about what happened. There was almost no written records in terms of ordinary people's lived experience. There was almost nothing. There was folk records that were taken many decades later, and in the folk records, the people would talk about what happened to other people. They would talk about what happened in the other townland, never in their family, never in where they lived. And so that disassociation is huge, and it's really important to understand why is that disassociation built into the sort of cultural transmission of that trauma. And so that's what I wanted to explore in that novel. And so what I figured out writing it is that for Grace to survive such an event, which is what she does, she has to beg, borrow, lie, steal, maybe worse. And these are the things that will actually make you silent, that you cannot, you have to shut them down inside yourself in order to get on with things. And sometimes some things are too great to speak about. And so, you talked about this, I know it was mentioned earlier, there's the black pages in that book. There's a point at which the writing has come off the grid, so to speak. It's come off the grid of realism, and then it just starts to come apart and just fragment because reality can no longer be met. It can no longer be interpreted. It can no longer be understood, and that's the point at which Grace herself is
mute.
Well, she's not there yet, but she's about to, she's in a fugue state, and she's about to come as close to death as you're going to get. And we meet the black pages, where it's just, I think, six black pages, and that was the sort of the point at which language could no longer meet what was being endured, and that is the end point of the silence. And then she doesn't speak for the rest of the book.
The end point of the language. I want to ask you something else. Before you wrote novels, you were a film critic. And so I wanted to ask you if there are films that have influenced your writing. Certainly a sense of character, a sense of place.
Yeah, I mean, cinema has been hugely important. And I was a cinephile for a long time, to such an extent that I would often take a week off work for the Dublin Film Festival and just go watch 3 films a day. And I always knew that cinema, like if I was ever going to be a writer, cinema would have a role in the shaping of my mind and how I thought about it. And I remember in my 20s, I didn't start writing fiction until I was 30, and I remember watching Robert Bresson's films and really falling in love with French filmmaker Robert Bresson. Films like Pickpocket and Oh Hazard Balthazar, really extraordinary films. Very unique, very spiritual, but very elemental. Really sort of these kind of very brutal inquiries, but a very unique style. And I remember thinking, I really want to, if I ever write, I want to write the way he makes films.
The way he makes the movie, yes.
Very behavioral. And so that was, Bresson was really in my thoughts when I was starting to write. And I realized as time has gone on that Michael Haneke has been there for me too, because I mean, I genuinely think that he's been the best filmmaker, for, this century. I think films like The White Ribbon and Cachet or Hidden, and probably is this called in English, are just extraordinary films, and I've watched them many times. And he has this really important trait where he does not flinch. He does not look away. He does not turn the camera away for your benefit. He confronts you, that he has this very strict sense of truth. And truth is really important because as an artist, like, this is what you're going after, is with each work, you're trying to uncover some hidden gleam of knowledge, something that's truthful about the world. That's what you're trying to seize hold of, something that's not been articulated before. And so truth is all you have. And when as Kafka said, do not water it down, do not bend it, do not alter your soul for whatever, And because once you start to dilute or look away or change things for the sake of your readership or write looking over your shoulder, you're done. You're finished.
Compromised.
You're no longer a genuine artist. And so I really sort of taken from Haneke that sense of the truth is actually all that you have. And this is why Prophet Song has worked, because it does ask the reader to go into places that are hugely challenging. They're hugely challenging even to write them. But the book does not avert its gaze.
No, and I would argue that none of your books do. I mean,
Yeah.
there is a moment in Prophet Song, we won't describe it, but it's the worst moment in the book. And I would imagine that is a moment that was hard to write, that was not something that came easily to you.
Yeah, and I had been blocked for about 3 months with that particular chapter, and I knew that I was going to have to do something really, really challenging and difficult, and something that was going to ask something enormous of the reader. And if you're going to do that, you have to come at it with a great deal of responsibility. But if you're going to do it, like I mentioned earlier, you're holding this mirror up so the reader can stare at the Medusa. And so you don't want the reader to turn into stone, or maybe you don't want them to fall into the abyss. And so there's a lot of responsibility. So how do you do that? And so I didn't know how to do it for quite a while. And I was definitely blocked for about 3 months. And I had a dream. And I woke up from it, and it was all there in the dream. The dream showed me exactly what I needed to do. I remember getting out my notebook and just writing everything down, everything I could remember from the dream. And as I started writing it, I realized it was showing me exactly what I needed to do. It was extraordinary.
That is extraordinary.
And I later wrote an essay about this called The Dream That Wakes You Up. And because again, this is one of the major routes for the subconscious to articulate things to you that you're consciously, willfully neglecting or not paying attention to, if you know how to notice it. And I say that not as a mystic. I'm not mystically inclined. Psychological truth. But I say that as somebody who's been watching my own mind. I've been meditating for over a third of my life. And, when you're an artist, you're watching creativity. As a meditator, you're watching your own mind and you're watching creativity at the same time. You're seeing this transmission back and forth. Mm-hmm. And so I'm quite happy to talk about this stuff at the expense of sounding like a loon, but because I know that it's actually true. I know that there's this, and a great number of artists have talked about this stuff before, because there's a fundamental truth that language is only around for 100,000 years. How did we operate before language?
Before that, yeah. All right. Well, listen, you've been talking to me for a long time, and you're tired. So, Paul Lynch, thank you so much. This is great.
Brilliant.